You know, when police walked into Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment back in 1991, they stumbled into a house of horrors that, honestly, the world is still trying to process. But as the story unfolded, the big question wasn't just about what he did, it was about why. Was he a calculated, evil monster? A man completely lost to madness? Or was it somehow both? We're going to unpack the evidence, the science, and the psychology behind one of the most infamous killers of all time.
And that quote you're seeing from Milwaukee's chief medical examiner? It just says it all. This wasn't just a messy crime scene. No, this was a curated, terrifying collection. And the world only found out about it because of one fateful night.
So let's start right there. The moment the doors to apartment 213 were opened and the true horror was revealed. So how did this all come to light? Well, it all kicked off with one man's desperate escape. Tracy Edwards managed to flag down a couple of police officers, telling them this guy had handcuffed him and was threatening his life. Now, the cops were a little skeptical at first, but they followed Edwards back to the apartment to check it out, having no idea what they were about to walk into.
What they found inside is just unimaginable. One officer stumbles upon 74 Polaroid photos, each one documenting horrific acts of dismemberment. Another cop opens the fridge and finds a human head, and it just kept getting worse. They found more heads, skulls, human hearts, a torso in the freezer, and a giant 57-gallon drum filled with acid, where 3 more bodies were dissolving.
So, with a scene this gruesome, this fragmented, investigators faced a monumental challenge. How do you even begin to give these victims back their names? It was like piecing together the world's most horrifying puzzle.
It took a massive, and I mean massive, forensic investigation. Experts from all kinds of different fields had to come together for one single mission: to identify the remains of 11 separate people that they found in that tiny apartment.
Okay, so one of their most powerful tools was something called forensic odontology. It's basically dental science for detectives. Because think about it, your dental records are totally unique to you. So experts could compare the teeth from the remains to the dental records of missing people, and that's how they got positive IDs when other methods were impossible. And working right alongside them were forensic anthropologists. This is the incredible science of reading the story our bones tell. These experts could look at just fragments of bone and figure out a victim's profile, their age, sex, ancestry, things like that. It was absolutely crucial work. And this table right here, it shows you just how vital all these different techniques were. You can see how dental records, that's forensic odontology, helped identify Curtis Straughter, Errol Lindsay, and Tony Hughes. They got a fingerprint match for Oliver Lacey. And look at that last one. Forensic anthropology was the key to identifying Stephen Hicks, who was actually Dahmer's very first victim from years and years earlier.
So once the victims were identified, the entire focus of the case shifted. It wasn't about the what anymore. Everyone knew what he did. Now it was all about the why. What could possibly be going on inside this man's head?
Well, forensic experts pretty quickly classified Dahmer as what's known as an organized killer. See, disorganized killers are impulsive, chaotic, but an organized killer, they plan things out. They lure their victims, they control the crime scene. And this was so important because it points to premeditation, to someone who is very aware of what they're doing. And that last point, taking souvenirs, that explains the horrifying collection of photos and body parts. It was all part of his ritual.
But honestly, the most chilling insight came from Dahmer himself. In his confession, he said this: it wasn't just about the act of killing for him. It was about this deeply twisted desire to stop people from leaving him. He wanted to possess them, to keep them with him forever, even if it was just a part of them.
And that question, his motive, his mental state, that became the absolute heart of the trial. Because look, his guilt was never really in question. The entire legal fight, it all came down to one single word: insanity. So Dahmer's lawyers, they made a really strategic legal move. They changed his plea from not guilty to guilty but insane. Now, what that does is it admits to all the horrible acts. So the prosecution didn't have to prove what he did anymore. The burden of proof shifted to the defense, who now had to prove he was legally insane when he did it.
So the trial basically became this showdown between psychiatrists. The defense argued that his necrophilia was a mental disease so powerful that he was like a runaway train, he just couldn't stop. But the prosecution fired back. They pointed to all the evidence that he was an organized killer, how he drugged his victims, how he hid the evidence. They argued these are not the actions of someone who's out of control. This is someone who knew exactly what he was doing.
And after just 2 weeks of testimony, the jury came back with its decision. They found that, according to the law in Wisconsin, Jeffrey Dahmer was not mentally ill when he committed the murders. He was legally sane. And that meant he was fully responsible for every single one of his actions.
So what did that sane verdict mean? It meant this. The judge handed down 15 consecutive life sentences, one after another. He got a 16th one later for a murder in Ohio. We're talking a sentence of over 900 years. The message could not have been clearer. Jeffrey Dahmer was never getting out of prison.
But as you might guess, the story doesn't just end with him being locked away. The final violent chapter of his life was written inside prison walls.
He spent his first year in isolation, mostly for his own safety. But eventually, he actually asked to be moved into a unit with other prisoners. And in the short time he was there, he became a born-again Christian, he survived one attempt on his life, and then ultimately he met his end at the hands of another inmate.
So why was he killed? Well, according to his murderer, a man named Christopher Scarver, Dahmer showed absolutely no remorse. In fact, he said Dahmer would taunt other inmates with these sick, morbid jokes, like shaping his food to look like severed body parts and using ketchup for blood.
On the morning of November 28, 1994, Scarver, Dahmer, and one other inmate were left unsupervised while they were on cleaning duty. After the attack, Scarver just walked back to his cell and calmly told a guard what he had done, saying that God told him to do it.
Scarver later filled in the details. He said he was carrying a newspaper article that detailed all of Dahmer's crimes, and he confronted him with it. When Dahmer tried to walk away, Scarver grabbed a 20-inch metal bar from the prison weight room and beat both Dahmer and the other inmate to death.
And that brings us to this final, really complicated question. At his own sentencing, Dahmer told the judge he wanted death. So when he was murdered in prison, was that some kind of grim, street-level justice? Or was it just a total failure of the system that was supposed to contain him? It's a question people are still debating to this very day.